Okay, welcome to Countercurrents again. I'm Larry Johnson, and I am pleased to have my friend, Alastair Crooke, with us today. Alastair is a genuine expert on the Middle East, having lived there, worked there, and knows a lot of the players on both sides of the equation. So oftentimes you get a lot of pundits, perhaps like me, shooting their mouths off about things that haven't actually been there. So it's great, Alastair, to have you here to talk about this.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Larry.
So you and I were talking a little bit yesterday, and maybe you can, this would be a good jumping off start. The role that you see that religion is playing in this conflict, because it strikes me that unlike what happened in 2006 and in prior dust-ups and wars between the Israelis and the Palestinians, this one seems to actually have more of a, as we talked about, an eschatological impetus. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems it was pretty obvious to me. I wrote about 10 years ago that I thought we were heading towards a new form of conflict, a conflict that wouldn't be in terms of, if you like, secular, the previous secular management of conflict, because it would rotate much more to religious symbols. Temple Mount on the one hand and Al-Aqsa on the other. And so even then, I mean, this was at a time when, of course, the jihadists were active or had been active. They were just sort of declining in importance in Syria. But even there was a strong sense it had given. In fact, paradoxically, you could say that Saudi Arabia was partly responsible for this, because it came both parties. Even 10 years ago, I was writing that you could see this is probably where it was going to head. Then just to update, and this is important, I think, for your listeners to understand this, when the new government was formed, Netanyahu formed the government about just over a year ago, a bit more. My wife, Ashley, sort of, who's lived in the Middle East and speaks Arabic and a bit of Hebrew too, she pointed to the screen and said, "Look there, the Mizrahi are going into the prime minister's office." It was unbelievable. What was that? The Mizrahi are the Jews that don't come from Europe, but they come from North Africa and the Middle East. They have a very different character to them. And until this time, the dominant party, if you like, in politics had always been the European Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, who were dominant in power. At one time, they had a clear majority. Now they don't, and now the Mizrahi have come into office and form the government. It's not just Mizrahi. There are Smotriches and Mizrahi, but it is mostly Mizrahi. And why it's important was the Mizrahi were the first members. They were spotted by Begin when their numbers were quite small. They were spotted by Begin, and they formed the core of the Irgun. This was the, if you like, the party that used violence in order to cause the first Nakba, the expulsion of the Palestinians from the area, and then have been the sort of bedrock of Likud since. But then, just over a year ago, they took the government. They took the government and are in power. And of course, this has created a rift, a very extreme rift, which played out in terms of controversies over the Judicial Reform Act and other things between the more secular European Ashkenazi population and the Mizrahi when they came into power. And so when they came into office, they put three key items as their platform, in part, as a government. And it's formally in the government, understandings, the papers, the document that they all signed. The first of one was to found Israel on the land of Israel. That translates for people to really understand as no Palestine, because the land of Israel goes from the river to the sea, perhaps even goes, it's not clearly defined, but could go up to the Litani and goes up to the Euphrates if you want. Anyway, the first program was that they were going to establish Israel on the land of Israel, which translates into no Palestinians, no Palestinian state. The second thing was that they were going to build the third temple. And that is, preparations are well underway for that. They brought in the red heifers and all the elements that are necessary for the rites of inaugurating this temple. They practice it. They're moving towards it. There's an architect. Its plans are already drawn up. They're there waiting to be implemented. But just so, for the sake of clarity, to understand, that means the demolition of Al-Aqsa. And Al-Aqsa, of course, has become a symbol, not just a symbol of Jerusalem and religion. It's become a symbol of Islamic civilization. Not Shia, not Sunni, not Muslim Brotherhood, not Wahhabi, not Salafist, but Islam writ large.
Right.
1,000 years. And then their third element was the implementation of halakhic law over secular law in the new Israel, which then shivers up the spine of most of the secular population of Israel, as you can well imagine. It would mean fundamental change for many of them in the way of living and so on. So this is the revolution. And I'm explaining it because many people just don't see that there's been a revolution,
Right.
or what this government is about. And then when you go a little further into it, they are essentially looking to establish Israel. And the Mizrahi regard if you like, those Ashkenazi Europeanized Jews as not really being Jews. And they don't think they really want to found the state of Israel as they are commanded to do, because they accuse the Ashkenazi Jews of really being quite comfortable with the occupation. They've learned to live with it. They're happy with it. They don't mind going on with it. Whereas these the people the Temple Mount movement and the radical, if you like, nationalist religious groups are going ahead with us and implementing it in a real way. Hence, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Smotrich on the administrative side, Ben-Gvir on the security side. Ben-Gvir has been forming, if you like, this vigilante army of about 10,000 settlers and gave them all weapons. I mean, for those that didn't, handed out weapons to all of these people. And they are, if you like, a militia army, and the IDF are frightened of them. Not so long ago, they invaded an IDF base where some soldiers were being held prisoner under investigation for torturing Palestinians who were held in another prison. And the IDF backed off. The police backed off. No one is arrested. They just came in and took it over.
It sounds a little bit like Ernst Röhm's brown shirts during the rise of the Nazi Party.
Well, I don't know that I don't think well, maybe, but what I think, it is an army, and they call themselves increasingly the Kingdom of Judea, in opposition to the, if you like, State of Israel. And they have behind them a large number of rabbis, including Dov Lior, one of the most famous, but there are about 100 behind this group, including those that were involved in the shooting of so many Palestinians in a synagogue some time ago. And they are radical and they are zealots, and they are now in power, and they do have, and the rabbis have, this eschatological vision. So, when people look at them, and that's why I wrote even 10 years ago, there's no good sort of understanding what's happening in Israel through the secular prism, through the secular, if you like, standards that we had. It's a completely different epistemology. It is based on revelation and the orders of God. And when I say that, and people say, well, isn't Christianity and Judaism more or less the same? I just want to read out the phrase which Netanyahu keeps referring to, and it comes from Samuel 1, verses 15 to 29. King Saul was admonished by the prophet Samuel for not completely eradicating the Amaleks. Saul had spared the king, Agag, and the best of the sheep and cattle, which the Israelis were unwilling to destroy completely. According to the Bible, this level of annihilation was not enough and displayed King Saul's supposed weakness. This is why Samuel admonished the king. The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission, saying, go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. This is a sentence Netanyahu used at the end of his Hebrew address, reacting to the ICC application. But I just wanted to, because people sort of, because we talk about Judeo-Christianity, there are definite, and these comes from the Talmud and other sources, the oral Talmud as well. And so this is what you're talking about now is the difference. Here we're talking about, if you like, the difference between revelation and obedience. That revelation is the word of God, and it requires complete obedience. No questions about it, no pause. That's why they refer, if you like, as the example is Jacob and his son. And God instructed him to take the knife and to sacrifice his son. And only at the point that he was doing it was his hand held. But he displayed the obedience to the law, even though it meant the possible sacrifice of his son. And so when you see these young troops dancing in Gaza and, with their TikTok music and looking very modern, they are talking about the Amalek then. They refer to the Amalek then. And their rabbis tell them that this is not an option to kill the women and children. It is obligatory. This is part of the Talmud, and it is obligatory to do these things. And as I say, there are many, many of these rabbis, and even there are a rabbi, I saw a video of a rabbi who was blessing one of those who'd been guilty of torturing the Palestinians in prison and saying, of course you can do that. That is, these are not Islam. These are not really humans. They are they are Christians and Muslims. Anyway, so that's really the basis of it. So we are in a very different element. And so what is happening at the moment in this period is, and again, this is not seen in the West very much at all, is that what is being slowly unfolded in Gaza is going to be first of all, to drive the Palestinians from the north. And as they have said, and it's written, you can see it and find it on the internet, and then to starve the remainder in the north. And then when it's empty of it, they will put settlers in there and annex the north of Gaza. And what people don't understand, that for this group, maybe half the people of Israel, this would be a huge thing. This would be Netanyahu, for the first time in 50 years, adding land to Israel, expanding the land of Israel after 50 years of withdrawals, of retractions from the land of Israel. And then this is happening too in the West Bank. Both administratively, Smotrich is effectively put the PA under a siege that it probably won't survive: economic siege, financial siege, people under a financial siege. And Ben-Gvir has set loose the settlers to start driving the people out of the West Bank towards towards Jordan, what they say is actually the Palestinian state and will be in the future. So in a sense, everyone talks about, Netanyahu is seen as a failure. Well, for a lot of Israelis, that's true. But I'm just trying to explain for a key sector, this is not failing yet. It may well do in the longer run. But this is actually a plan that's unfolding on the ground. And if you like, the kingdom of Judea is being established. And many, as they see it and welcome it, many secular Israelis are going. And they say, maybe good riddance. But so there's these big schisms within Israel.
Do you think there was ever a period over the last, 30 years, 40 years, that there was a genuine desire on the part of anyone in Israel to actually negotiate with the Palestinians to establish a Palestinian state? Or was it always, I guess, a contrivance? They paid lip service to it, but we're doing everything behind the scenes they could to sabotage it.
No, I haven't. I can't go back 30, but I can go back 20 years when I was involved there working with Arafat and on the Oslo process. And when the Oslo process was signed, it implied that Israel would want to create a state, a Palestinian state. They would want it for demographic reasons. In other words, that the Palestinians would soon outnumber the Israelis, and therefore it was better if they had the state. But that was the Western view of it. It wasn't the Israeli view of the situation. But the West thought, and these were the premises of the whole Oslo Accords, were first of all that Israel wanted. It would opt for a Palestinian state. Secondly, that the Palestinians therefore had a duty to assure Israel of its security. The Palestinians had the duty to secure Israel of its assure Israel of its security. And thirdly, Israel alone, not the United States, no one else, would be the judge of when that security had been met and had been achieved. Well, for all these years, it hasn't happened. But even at the outset, if there was a sincere wish, to have two-state solution, you would have seen, because the two-state solution would require, if you like, a separating of resources, water resources, electric resources, land and things would have to be sort of started and prepared for this separation. Electricity pylons and everything like this would have to have, quite separate structures. None of that occurred. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. From the beginning, it was going the other way towards, if you like, a unitary state that was being established. And Oslo was really just a construct by the Americans, I'm afraid to say, more or less. I mean, I think some of them have even admitted that they were doing this, that it was really, it gave ample scope for Israel to sort of delay and postpone, talk a bit about a two-state solution, but not actually to mean it.
Okay. Well, I guess the common thing I hear over here from many is they'll say, those Palestinians, they've sabotaged every attempt at peace. Israel's made all these generous offers, and the Palestinians just can't get out of their way to accept the peace. And I pointed out that, actually going back with even the foundation of Hamas, that Israel quickly started using Hamas, funneling money to Hamas as a way to try to sabotage the Palestinian Authority, and has been very cynical, in my view, in trying to do everything they could to create situations where it would look like it was the Palestinians' fault, but it was really the Israelis working behind the scenes through intelligence sources to try to disrupt it. Is that a fair assessment, or too simple?
Well, a little bit earlier, I'd written an article about the Palestinian things, and I showed it to the American ambassador at the time, and he was in Tel Aviv, not in Jerusalem. And I showed it, and he said, that's great. It's a really good article, but you'll never get it published or circulated. And I said, why? Why not? If you like, he said, well, you don't say anywhere that Palestine, Arafat was offered everything, and he turned his back on it and took up a Kalashnikov and killed the Jews. And you have to put that in. It's obligatory. If you don't do that, then no one will read your article. So I suggest you put that in at the beginning. And this really came out of the sort of Camp David accords. And I talked to Arafat after the court. I said, I used to see him once every 10 days or so, alone, without his Rudena and his advisors and things like that. And I said, so what happened at Camp David? And he said, the extraordinary thing was, he said, they wanted me to make an agreement on the Temple Mount, that they would have the surface area, and we would just have the substructure, but it would be divided horizontally. I can't remember exactly which way, but horizontally. And he said, so I said to the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, he said, I can't make decisions about the Temple Mount, about Al-Aqsa, without consulting the religious authorities in the region. It's not possible. I don't have that right. And she said, no, we don't allow it. We won't permit you to phone anyone. A few years later, I saw Madeleine Albright, and I said, why on earth did you make that restriction that prevented an agreement coming into being? And she just turned to me and she said, look, it was a rule in the State Department. We had this rule. We absolutely refused to take any religious consideration into our policy. So we just always rejected any form of consideration of religious or spiritual needs. And so I said no. And so there's, a long tail. I think Arafat told me he knew that the thing was over within 6 weeks. I remember talking to him, and he said, I knew 6 weeks on. He said, I knew because it was supposed to be Jericho first, and then Jerusalem and so on. And it was never Jericho. And he said the warning sign came when the CIA officer came, and he handed me a list of 50 names. And this is Arafat speaking. He said, what do I do with this? He said, you go out, arrest them and imprison them now. These are the names that were given by Israel, and you have to do this immediately. He said, when I heard that, I knew, this wasn't going to be a sovereign state. It wasn't going to be a state at all.
We've almost come. This conflict started as far as East and West with the Crusades. Religious wars built this conflict between Islam and Christianity, and then we went through a period where sort of the sectarian aspects of the conflict subsided. I mean, they were still there, but we had this completely secular focus. And now it looks like we are back to the full-blown sectarian war. So is there an exit ramp off of this? I mean, because what we're seeing, it looks like we're headed for, and whether it's a last day final judgment battle of Armageddon, regardless, I don't see the political will on at least the Western side to try to find a peaceful way out of this.
I would say there is one way out, but we're not there yet. And the idea of a two-state solution, which you hear all the time being promoted in the West and even by our colleagues at times, and I say to them, this anecdote that at the time, I was working both sides, if you like. I knew that Ariel Sharon instructed Rafi Eitan, who was his chief intelligence officer, to take me around the settlements, the extreme settlements. And I was a bit surprised, but he took me there and he instructed them that I was guest of the Prime Minister, Sharon, and that they should speak absolutely freely. And they did. And my God, they're nuts. They are complete zealots, armed to the teeth, full of hatred for the Palestinians. They regard them as subhuman, and they just intend to take their land. That's their only thing. However, when I came back, Rafi Eitan rang me and he said, did you understand why we sent you? And I said, yes, I do understand. Nothing more was said. I knew what he meant. No one, the Israeli army, no one was going to remove those people without a massive bloodbath. And so I say to all these people, two-state solution, who endorse it. And I say, that's fine. Two-state solution. We have the UN resolutions 248 and so on, proposing a state with a capital in East Jerusalem. But if you endorse that and you promote that, then if you want to be honest about it, you have to say whether you have, if you like, the mandate to use military force in order to remove 800,000 settlers from the West Bank. If you don't have the ability, if you're not got the army or the military force to remove 800 armed and ready to fight settlers from the West Bank, stop making this this nonsense about a two-state solution. You can't achieve it, I can't imagine Europeans actually, or Americans being willing to put military forces in to remove these people. fighting Jews who will tenaciously refuse. I mean, 800,000. You know a little bit about the military. I know that.
Yeah.
I mean, what sort of force would you need for that? It's not not small.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it'd be very consequential, and that's why I say I don't. It is almost as if Israel has embarked on a suicide mission. That
It needn't be. It needn't be. The crux of this that goes back to 48 and is at the heart of why Iran and the resistance groups are pursuing this is not about the fact that Jews live between the river and the sea at all. It is about the concept of Zionism, that one population group has special political, economic, land rights over another population who shares the same land. And that is the point. And the whole aim of the, if you like, this resistance that has come up, which is orchestrated, which is organized, is being to push Israel to the point of exhaustion and desperation, when they then start to say, listen, we need to question these assumptions about, our state here. And we have to even give up Zionism in order to live a life in the future. Now, we're a long way from that now. But if there was one thing they could do, I mean, they would bring it about. And this is what an Israeli told me some years ago. And he said, at the end, Alice, you know what they'll do? You know what we will do is we'll open a secret channel to Iran. Then the Americans will come, and last, very end tail, the Europeans will get around to understanding it. And he said, but that's how this will end. And I think he's probably right. I have to say then again very clearly, not going to happen now. I don't think the conditions are there. I don't believe there's any chance of that. So for the time being, no, I don't see any other way out other than something of that sort.
Well, can you explain how you've seen the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran change? I won't say evolve over the years, but from what it was back in the 1980s to what it is today, it strikes me that, if you will, Hezbollah is becoming the grown-up child that is able to do things on its own without having to seek approval or support out of Iran.
Well, actually, I mean, you got that a little bit back to front. I'm not talking about you, but I mean generally. Because it was the Shia of South Lebanon, with their schools and their universities and the houses, that set up the Iranian state in 1501. And it was Lebanon that was brought in and constructed the main architecture of the Iranian state. So they don't feel or don't think of themselves as sort of an offshoot of modern Iran at all. They see themselves as entirely part, not of Iran, because they see themselves as Lebanese, but they are part of the Shia community, and the Shia world. So I've seen, again, I think many Westerners misinterpret this in the sense that as often as not, and I know this because I sometimes have been almost in the room, but sometimes it's Tehran asking the advice of Hezbollah rather than Hezbollah asking the advice of Tehran. It's a two-way process. They respect each other. Each have got their expertise. Iran has a strategic vision which is different, but at places it overlaps and meshes together. So the relationship is much more complex than generally presented. The Hezbollah doesn't just take orders from from Iran. It isn't just a sort of servant sitting there to be used by Iran. That's a complete misunderstanding.
Well, that's the Zionist narrative, and it's also echoed here in Washington that Iran is the puppet master pulling and creating Hezbollah, and that's why they ultimately have to destroy Iran. You got to destroy Iran. And so,
well, just tell them that the Shia in Lebanon have been there in the south for 500 years, more actually, since about 900. I mean, it's just such nonsense. This is why when Israel says, "Oh, we're going to move the Shia, the Hezbollah out of the south across the Litani." I mean, they've been there for 500 years. I don't think they plan to go anywhere else. That's their home. That's where they've been. And north, by the way, north of the Litani is not really quite one of the small parts of Lebanon that is quite antagonistic anyway to Hezbollah, because on the coastal side, you've got quite radical Sunniists. It's more Hariri territory, and then you've got the Druze. And the Druze play this complicated game. Some of them are in the Israeli army and they serve, and they have a very bad reputation. And others support Assad and are very loyal and have a good reputation in Syria. So I don't think that's a prospect. I'm sure people didn't even think about that when they were making these proposals that are coming up. I mean, and sending Amos Hochstein to Lebanon. And then, again, the misguided sort of sense of policy. What I find quite frustrating is, that policy is so deeply buried in this sort of Western mechanical thinking, rationality, and it's also based in the idea that, if you can offer someone something, if they will take something else, they will accept that. It is a strictly utilitarian structure of thinking, money, that they wouldn't want to die and things like this. They don't think in this way. And, Lebanon, and I've lived in Lebanon for some years. I mean, there's no way. Who would remove Hezbollah from the south? I mean, unless you put in foreign troops, in which case, that would be a war. But who would remove them? I mean, UNIFIL would not do it. The Lebanese army is a conscript army, and most of them are Shia too. And the thing people don't understand is the Shia have had a long history of suffering, being massacred. I mean, the Shia used to dominate the whole area about 900. I mean, it was all Shia, and then the Sunnis and the Caliph restricted them, and Egypt was Shia too at that point. And at times then when they've been repressed, I mean, I know the stories, and they weren't allowed to go to their own mosque. They were forbidden by the caliphs and the local authorities from doing that, on pain of losing a finger each time they went to the mosque. So they went, and they lost a finger. They went again and lost another finger. And when they'd lost all the fingers on both hands, they still went to the mosque and started losing the toes, and then they lost their hands as well. And they still continued to go to this is the sort of people that it's very hard for us in the West, and I understand this. It's hard for us to understand, this is a different way of understanding the world, and Shiism is very different from Sunnism in this respect.
Now, are we starting to see a healing? Let's call it a healing of the rift, or a bridging of the gap between the Shia and the Sunnis. I did an interview with Zainab. She's a correspondent for.
Yeah, I know her. I know Zainab.
Yeah. And, I asked her about this, and she quickly just dismissed it because from her standpoint, she didn't see the sectarian difference. She saw more of a common bond. And so when we saw Iran and Saudi Arabia start to reconcile, at least reestablish diplomatic relations, is that an indicator, a valid indicator that we're starting to see maybe these two branches of Islam that have been so diametrically opposed in many over the years starting to coalesce?
I think something important is happening. I think that you see this in this shrewd decision about 2 years ago by Hamas to call this the Al-Aqsa flood. They symbolized it around Al-Aqsa because, as I said, it's not Sunni, it's not Shia, it's not Wahhabi, it's not Muslim Brotherhood. It is Islam, and the civilization of Islam stretching back 1,000 years. And then what we have had is the spark of nationalism coming back. Nationalism, which has, been suppressed really since, 53 or 58, when we had this great suppression of the Ba'athist socialist Arab republics by the, you remember this was the result of the clean break document that people like Richard Pearl and others had produced to ally with the kings and the monarchs and emirs against the socialist Arab republics, which they saw as being too close to Russia. Wolfowitz was very frightened of their sort of connection to Russia. But now we have, for the first time, this sort of nationalism fusing with, if you like, the resistance, not Islamic movement per se, but with the resistance. And so, the Hamas of Gaza are very different, if you like, from the Hamas in Doha. I know the Hamas in Doha very well. And Hamas in Gaza, they have a different outlook. They are fighting a war of national liberation, an anti-colonial war. They are not fighting an Islamic war. And they say that. And the founder of Hamas said that very specifically to me when I met him before he was assassinated.
Yeah, I think we're entering a phase that militarily doesn't make sense from the standpoint of Israel. And what I mean by that is, it'd be one thing if after the last 11 months they had quailed, suppressed, and destroyed Hamas, but they haven't. In fact, Hamas appears in some ways to be stronger, at least,
Yes.
Gathering recruits. It's becoming more supported than it was prior to this October 7th. And so, having not suppressed that, Israel now is turning to engage and expand the war with Hezbollah, expanding the war at the very time that, in terms of their military resources, that they've degraded. They've not increased. Why are they doing that?
You see, Sinwar, in fact, has written a novel. It's a very interesting thing. It's in Arabic, not other, but it's all about the dispossessed people, the people of the camps, but it's also about the need for sacrifice. The blood must be spilled in order to preserve the Palestinian people, not necessarily the people of Gaza today, but the Palestinian people. It requires a sacrifice, and we willingly give the sacrifice if it can keep the Palestinian people alive and in the future. And so, again, these are sort of sentiments that are very hard for very utilitarian Westerners, very materialist Westerners to really grasp how people can think in this way. But it is a different form of thinking of, the actual virtues of sacrifice. And that is a key element in Shi'i, but also in other parts, Sunni thinking. And in a way, what someone said to me, which I think was quite prescient, said what was happening in Lebanon with Hezbollah was the Kerbalization of Lebanon. I have to explain that. Kerbala is a city in Iraq, but it was also the site where the Prophet's grandson decided to fight the Damascus army of 3,000 with a force of about 80 people, and was slaughtered on the ground. Ibn Hussein, who was the grandson. And this sacrifice is, when you hear the Shia talk about every day is Ashura, every month is Kerbala, this is what they're talking about, about standing and accepting death in the name of justice. It is what was said to me is, it's not wholly true, but it's very true in terms of Hezbollah. I put, incidentally, a little link to a video of their missile city. I don't know if you'd seen it, but you might find it fascinating. There's huge underground cities. They have several of them under Lebanon, which is where their missiles are started. So, all these things we're seeing at the moment are just untrue. The story about, Airbnb missiles, having missiles in your attic and getting that income,
right,
instead of paying it, absolute balderdash, nonsense. Even in 2006, I remember on the ground, because I was in the South during those periods, and, Hezbollah, the villages and towns had asked them before, and Hezbollah gave an absolute undertaking never to help any weapons anywhere near anyone's town or village or house. Absolute injunction. And now, of course, they don't have, there are no weapons or armed men wandering around the south of Lebanon. They are in these huge, you'll see them with cars dashing up and down and motorcycles going backwards and forwards. They're elaborate, deep things, in many, and that's where their missiles are. And they don't bring them up and move them around. We see the movement of Hezbollah's missiles. They can't. They're underground. They fire up through silos, straight through the mountainside. But the mountains there are sort of this craggy rock that, it's not smooth rock. It's all in little, pinnacles and areas. It's ideal. It's like the Khyber. It's ideal place for, you can hide a huge force in that. And so again, you hear all the Western story, which is, oh, well, if the bombing doesn't work, we'll invade. Well, you're welcome. That's what Hezbollah wants. That's what they've been preparing for these years, is to have the Israelis were defeated in 2006. I incidentally write some articles explaining the defeat and why. And so at the time, I think you can still find them they're very ancient, but they're still available on the internet about, how Hezbollah went about defeating Israel.
Well, I'll share a name with you when we're offline, but this individual was part of the U.S. Department of Defense, is Jewish, and just yesterday I'm involved with a weekly Zoom call, was just almost jubilant about, oh man, Israel is really taking it to Hezbollah. They've destroyed half their missiles. It is, and I was like, because I listened to you on The Judge Monday morning, and I thought, here's Alastair, who's actually worked with these people, met with them. socialized.
Both sides.
Yes, but both sides. Yeah, it wasn't just, you weren't just on the Palestinian or the Hezbollah or Hamas side. You were also on the Israeli side. And so you've got actual knowledge there. And I'm just going, Alastair sees this thing quite differently. And
I do. I do.
So
and there are lots of Israelis who see it differently in the same way I do. Major generals and senior. There's a faction of the retired military, like there is in most countries. It's very right wing and very militaristic. But there are others that say, this is a disaster, and I don't believe for a second you've destroyed the Hezbollah military capabilities, and they try and prove that by saying, yes, but they're only firing rockets. They're waiting. All in good time. It's coming. Don't worry. As you move on, Israel, then we had today the first ballistic missile fired. And where was it fired? It was fired at the Mossad headquarters just outside Tel Aviv. So this was the first ballistic missile fired towards Tel Aviv, and it was intercepted, and so didn't strike a target. But this was a message, not really more. There are, nearly 100,000 more in the arsenals. If this goes on, so far it has been slowly. The Hezbollah strategy is to move slowly towards greater range. So now we have 2 million Israelis that have to go down to the shelters every day as the rockets are fired. Haifa is badly damaged. Safed is on fire. The town is on fire. There's a lot of damage. Air bases have been attacked. Of course, we have no knowledge about how seriously, because there's the censorship in base. The naval base south of Haifa has been attacked, and that was attacked by Iraqi missiles, I think, not those. And the other thing that is really exercising the Israelis, but they don't really say much about it, is there are now 40,000 troops, Syrian, Iraqis, and Houthis on the border with Golan, awaiting the order from Hezbollah if there's an invasion by Israel into Lebanon to invade across the Golan and the other borders into Israel, into the Galilee. And that is in the Israeli papers. It's you can check it, that they're saying that this is what's happening, and they're getting very worried about it. So, as I say, it goes back to something, but you will be able to explain it better than I, who am not a military person. But it's the ineffectiveness of air power.
Yeah,
an old story that has been going back 30 years or more. Everyone still, worships, firepower from the air. And it's not effective, and certainly not effective in the sort of terrain of South Lebanon with the valleys and mountains and when they've buried it as deeply as they have. And so all this story about, missiles being kept in houses is really just, justification for killing civilians. The people that are being, when you see 500 killed, it's not Radwan forces that were somehow out in the open in the south. Why would they be out in the open? Of course they're not in the open. These are just, they say, oh, well, there were houses here and houses there. They had a little graphic. They've done a little graphic which shows, a village and the houses here, and everyone's got nonsense.
Yeah.
It's just completely untrue, it's just really almost pathetic It's just like Gaza. Oh, yes, Netanyahu says, the Hezbollah are using the people, the civilians, as shields. They're hiding in the schools. They've hid their weapons in the houses. Same language as Gaza to justify that. And they're using this ineffective, like that AI lavender process. So the airplanes, for some time now, they've had this thing. They have this movement detection systems in their aircraft. And so that if it detects what it thinks might be a man moving or something, or a dog moving or something like that, then they bomb it. And that's called a big success, and they've destroyed a multiple launchers or something like this. As I say, even if you look at this video, you will see some of the multiple launchers. The Fadi-2 actually they have a bomb-proof cover, and from 19 millimeters down, they just remove this and they shoot the things, and bang, the cover goes straight on. So they're not out in the field for them to attack.
But
so, the whole calculation about this is awry, and this is the West is pursuing, and what worries me is we'll see much greater mistakes made. I see the 101st Airborne Division being deployed.
To do what?
Will die.
Yeah.
Well, go into the south. It would be catastrophic for them. Lightly armed people who don't know the ground, who have no idea of what they're doing. It will be these things. So, what it seems to me, just as Ukraine, we've seen more and more mistakes being made, which lead to more and more Ukrainian young men dying needlessly. The same thing is going to happen here if people can't really say things that they don't want to say, like your friend on the Zoom call.
Yeah.
He can't acknowledge that, that actually Hezbollah is very controlled, 80 kilometers, 60 kilometers. They've gone a bit further south of Haifa. They fired one ballistic missile. Tomorrow it will be more ballistic missiles. And they will keep this up for as long as it takes. Unless there's a realistic assessment. And if, the powers that be take all this nonsense that Israel is destroying Hezbollah in Dahi, that's a suburb of Beirut, and in the Bekaa, which is not in the south at all, by the way, it is up in the northeast. More civilians will die, young people, children and families. Lots of families are dying, complete families being killed, just like in Gaza, in Lebanon.
Well, I ran the numbers last night when the piece I wrote compared the losses in Ukraine of civilians, where the Russians have taken great pains to try to avoid killing civilians. And on average, there's about 320 Ukrainian civilians are dying every month, which is it's still a terrible toll. But what's going on in Israel is the Israelis are killing almost 4,000 Palestinians a month, which is 10 times. And it is just absolutely no regard.
Gaza, West Bank, South Lebanon. And, we hear lots of people calling for restraint. They don't do much about it. And I don't see any sign that they will do much about it. These deep structures of, Western globalist interest, on which they're load-bearing structures on which the whole of their policy towards the Middle East and elsewhere is very dependent. If those structures collapse, it's going to have a huge impact on the United States, because I mean, these structures that are basically pro-Zionist structures. What other raison d'etre do they have beyond saving Israel, supporting Israel? And if that doesn't happen, it will change the whole structure, the power structure of the United States, I believe.
Yeah. Is there anybody, do you see anybody in the West that is offering the kind of wisdom to intervene diplomatically to bring a halt to this? Because my assessment is, as I look at it, I think the political forces are arrayed in such a way that there's absolutely nobody in particularly in the American political system, Republican or Democrat, that's going to be able to intervene in any way to keep Israel from killing more civilians and killing itself.
No, because they've been so successful in suggesting that any derogation from complete support for Israel and its policies is anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And so, the Europeans are frightened of that, and Americans are frightened of it. Other people frightened too of this. So, they have a sort of a form of exemption. They have, if you like, immunity to do what they're doing for now, for the next period. No one is going to stop it, even if it could.
So let me get you to play prophet. The assumption in the West is, I have great faith in your abilities, brother. Yeah, I've seen you work. The assumption in the West is that Iran's ultimately have to come in to rescue Hezbollah. What do you think are the odds that Iran is going to actually get embroiled in this war with Israel?
I know Iran quite well too. I mean, I did the nuclear negotiations for Solana a bit in Iran, and I've been visiting and in touch for a long time. I think it would be a huge mistake, a very profound mistake, to think that Iran is bluffing when it says that if the circumstances are right, that it will strike Israel gravely in response to Haniyeh's murder. I think you will be making a mistake. The Iranians think these things through very carefully, and I think they've understood the question of time and strategic patience. I think the Mossad, the supreme leader, is going to speak tomorrow, and a sort of little preview has come through saying, end of strategic patience. I don't know what that means, and we have to wait to hear from him. But, don't get bemused by Pezeshkian and what he's been saying. That's a different story. I can go into it, but I'm not now. It's nothing to do with the policy of Iran on this issue, which is tightly coordinated with Moscow, and they see all this. It was like '67, the huge amassing of firepower, American firepower, in the Gulf, in the Mediterranean, and I suspect that Iran decided to wait it out. You can't keep ships like that at sea forever. Already one of the vessels gone. I mean, another one. I mean, they don't have to rush at this. And I think they're quite confident that despite, the sacrifice in blood that is being made, it is about ending something that has wrecked. Look at the loss of life. I'm not personally saying this as my own opinion. I'm just saying how people might view it in another society, culture. And when they look at what's happened since 48, and the damage and the destruction that is done to Iraq, to Syria, to Lebanon, to Libya, shall I go on? I mean, across the region, the millions killed, all in the name of saving Israel, as they believe it. There is a balance here. Yes, people are dying, but unless something is done, then the destructive machine of there will be senators calling for attacks on Iran and bombing Iran and others that will come out. But I don't think they're either particularly exercised about Hamas's situation in Gaza, and I don't think they're at all. They know the plan always was attrition, slow attrition. This is the weakness of the West. They always want shock and awe, quick bang, let's go over, all right, let's go home. And they think quite that, strategic patience. Israel will be less able to have the length of breath to endure rocket fire and missiles falling on their society than the Lebanese. It's an unfortunate picture to have to paint, but no, I don't think. I think people are making a miscalculation if they think that Iran is frightened, Iran is deterred. In many respects, Iran is the author of this whole process. It is their baby. It has been for many years. It was constructed by a brilliant strategic thinker about over 20 years about how to prepare for war with the United States. They have been focused on preparing for war with the United States for 20 years. And they put a lot of thought into that and how to manage it.
You got to wonder if they were surprised or, had their expectations confirmed with the failure of the U.S. Navy to stop the Houthis. That, we've had this Operation Prosperity Guardian that was initiated in December of 2023 to, quote, stop the Houthis from shutting down the Red Sea. And it failed, completely failed. And then, as you just noted, yes, within the last 2 or 3 days, a ship called an oiler, which is used to...
I saw.
It's used
it
to...
somehow got aground.
it ran aground. And so now this oiler is critical for refueling the ships that accompany the aircraft carrier, the carrier strike force. And it's out. The United States doesn't have any more. They don't have, think about this, $850 billion defense industry. They don't have any more that they can send out to resupply. And if they don't have that, those ships may actually have to be withdrawn from the area. I mean, it is, so you've got to, I wonder what the people in Iran, they've got to be sitting there going, no, that can't be right. The Americans can't be that incompetent, can they?
I think the Houthis are one of nature's great warrior peoples, along with the Gurkhas and a few others. They are natural fighters. They love fighting. They're enjoying themselves immensely with this. They produce, million-man marches threatening Israel, and the Houthis really are in their element, and I'm not surprised. I try and get this across, and I can't get it across at all. Maybe you have better luck. This is a completely different form of warfare. there's been a revolution in warfare. We're
Yes.
still stuck on the warfare of the post-war era, air dominance, bombing by air. And now people for 20 years have been working out that, there's a way to defeat that. And this is what you're seeing, whether it's in the Houthis or whether it's in Iran or somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, listen, my friend, I've kept you for well over an hour. The nice thing about these conversations, they go quick. You go, heavens, how did time fly so quickly?
I fear I'll have bored the pants off your listeners. I'm sure.
No, actually,
eschatology and all that.
You're a very sane, informed voice, and it resonates. I saw that Eve Smith at Naked Capitalism. I don't know if you saw her article, but she went into depth analyzing and alerting people to what you had said during your conversation with Judge Knapp Monday morning. I mean, it's always insightful, but I thought that was particularly useful in helping educate people. And that's why I do this here at, we've got the term countercurrents, because we want to go against the conventional wisdom and have people actually look at things for what it is. So,
that's good. It's a good project.
Thank you for doing it. And we're going to sign off today for Countercurrents episode. Okay. Thank you, Alastair. It was wonderful.
My pleasure.
Please, if you enjoyed this, I ask all those you who are viewing it to hit the like button and subscribe. I thank you.